politicians make big promises.
We are going to eliminate the fare on every single bus line.
There's a lot of magical thinking.
Former presidential candidate Andrew Yang.
As someone who's run a private company, you can't lie. if you BS in that kind of business context, you go out of business. But for our government, they can BS and then just life goes on and we get more and more fed up.
Yang tried his own party. It didn't succeed. But he has interesting things to say, so here's our full conversation. We discuss whether a third party could ever succeed, where politicians' magical thinking fails, what's different about entrepreneurship, and I push back on his support for universal basic income, basically free money. You're different from almost every politician because you were a businessman first.
Yes, I was. I ran a company just a couple blocks from where we're sitting right now, and it was the best time of my life, and I miss it to this day. Why, oh why did I stop being a private company CEO?
So some of your early companies failed.
Oh yeah, my first company was a flop, and then the next company I joined, which I was not the founder of, ran out of money. But then the company I ran for 6 years became #1 in the US and was bought by a public company.
A test prep company.
Yes. So I know what it means to make payroll. I know what it means to hire and fire. I know what it means to make decisions that are going to create or destroy value for the people that rely upon you. Also, efficient use of resources. You cannot waste money if it is a small private company that's trying to grow.
Why leave the Democratic Party?
When I was researching my book Forward and also reflecting on my own experience running for president, I realized that it wasn't going to work. That trying to change the duopoly from within the duopoly was a lost cause, and the duopoly itself is designed not to lead us to some shared success, but to turn us against each other, to play you lose, I lose over and over again while the rest of us actually are doing the losing. And so with that as your backdrop, you realize, wow, we really need a fundamental change in the political landscape, and that could not happen from within either party. Though I will say, right now, the playbook seems to be to go into one of the parties and take it over because the parties are so hollow and weak. Trump did that with the Republican Party in 2016. Bernie almost did it in 2016 and 2020, but the corporate Democrats managed to kneecap him and put his foot down.
Has Biden taken it over, or the progressives taken it over now? Bernie couldn't quite do it, but it's kind of like the Bernie people won.
Well, the Democratic Party has two warring factions, and Joe Biden is trying to play referee within them. But the reality is our country is polarized and getting worse all the time in terms of the two sides seeing each other as mortal enemies or evil. And we can see this is going to result in conflict, political violence, even eventually a Civil War 2.0. And I was writing this book, by the way, before January 6th. So when I realized all of this, I said, okay, how can you make the system more genuinely representative, more rational? And to folks who are libertarians and have been for years, you're like completely shut out of the political process. The duopoly prevents you from having any meaningful influence in races around the country. And that's the way they like it, even though 62% of Americans want an alternative. So when I saw all this, I said, look, need to leave the Democratic Party and start a popular movement to change the primaries to open primaries so that libertarians, independents, and other points of view will actually have a seat at the table.
But you're no libertarian.
No, I'm a forwardist. I started the Forward Party, but I will say that libertarians and forwardists and independents' interests are all the same in that all of us want a genuine choice beyond the duopoly. Most Americans want that. We just keep being bludgeoned and being told, can't have it, there is no way to change it, and oh, by the way, if you do try and change it, you're going to screw it up for side A or side B, generally side A, if you know the way they think. That bludgeon has been working, but it's going to stop working. It has to stop working, because if you hit the fast forward button, do we really think that we're still going to be limping along with this dysfunctional duopoly in 2032, 2036? It has to change. And I'm committed to doing everything I can to help change it. That is what the Forward Party is all about.
Forwardist has a nice sound to it.
Well, thank you. It's a real word, too. It means someone who is thinking about the future. There's been a lot of overlap between libertarians and forwardists, in part because we do have the shared interest, which is upending this duopoly. But also, there are a lot of people who are libertarians who think about the future a great deal, including a lot of friends of mine.
You write that running for president requires traits that make you a terrible leader.
Yes, I'd stand by that in large part because I have been the CEO of a company. And if you're the CEO of a company and you just thrust your face into a TV camera all day, your company is probably going to go to hell fairly quickly. But if you're a political candidate, then that actually is the coin of the realm. That's the way you achieve some level of notoriety and success. I'm going to suggest to people that talking to a TV camera is not actually leadership.
You make false promises regularly, claim powers you do not have.
No, yeah, we know Democratic and Republican rhetoric involves making very, very lofty promises, like rhetoric that sears the other side and says, it's going to be freedom and equality and all these things. Then you get in there and it's like, what can you really deliver for people? At this point, a lot of it is around inflaming people against the other side.
And magical thinking, you write. The political conversation about retraining workers. They always talk about retraining workers. The success rate has been about 0.
Yes, it has. And this is one of the things that animated my presidential campaign is that politicians will make false promises around things like worker retraining. And then if you dig into the facts or you actually go to a town that had the plant close, you find that no one is working as a coder.
They spend a lot of money. They come in and say, we have a whole retraining operation.
This is one of the things I think that makes libertarians like me is that I have a clear-eyed view of the limitations of what our government can and can't deliver. I mean, even if you spend the money on those retraining programs, people just walk out with valueless certificates and then no job. Now, that doesn't show up in the press conference. The press conference is maybe someone standing there saying, we're going to retrain 1,000 workers. But then no one ever comes back and sees whether they've been successful.
Why can't government retrain people spending all that money?
Well, it turns out that we're not widgets or robots, and that if you lose your manufacturing job, maybe you don't want to be retrained as a graphic artist. Maybe you don't have the talents to be a graphic artist. Maybe no one is hiring that role in your town or state. There's a lot of magical thinking involved. As someone who's run a private company, you can't lie. If you BS in that kind of business context, you go out of business. But for our government, they can BS and then just life goes on and we get more and more fed up.
For more of my content, go to johnstossel.com. I post a new short video every Tuesday. That's at johnstossel.com. Much as you criticize that, we'll play the footage of you crowd surfing. You got into it running for president. The people who worship politicians, they lifted you up.
Well, maybe they like the sound of $1,000 a month for everybody. But I talk about in my book, I'm a competitor. And when you're competing in a presidential race, you have to try and generate energy any way you can. And certainly in our case, we had to be a little bit more inventive and use social media because it's not like traditional media wanted to have Andrew Yang on the airwaves all the time.
No, they pretty much wanted you to go away.
Yes, they did. And the Yang Gang kept that from happening. Thank you. A lot of libertarians kept that from happening. Thank you. But it's one reason I love independent media voices like yourself, where you have your own judgment, your own point of view, and it's not like there's some edict from on high about which candidates to elevate and which candidates to ignore or marginalize.
And back to the crowd surfing image. People worship politicians. Wouldn't it be better for America if they worshiped entrepreneurs? Because entrepreneurs are who make us all richer. But they don't. They worship politicians.
Well, Elon Musk gets a lot of fandom and credit. I love entrepreneurs myself. I've been an entrepreneur. I was joking with you before we started filming. I'm probably a better entrepreneur than I am a politician. So my goal would be to help more Americans achieve their goals and dreams. I think that that's what's been missing for far too many of us.
We talked about the media tried to pretend you didn't exist. On MSNBC, they called you John Yang. CNBC used a wrong photo of you.
Their best hauls of the campaign cycle.
Certainly some of the mainstream news outlets didn't know what to make of me, and some actually were told not to feature me, including MSNBC. A producer came out and said I was on a list of candidates that she was told not to interview.
Because?
She was never given a rationale. But this is one reason why people mistrust what's going on with the media. It's legitimate. Like, it turns out that there are things going on behind the scenes that are trying to control the narrative.
What do you suppose that is? behind the scenes?
Well, a lot of it is that the media organizations and the two parties are hand in glove at this point. And people sensed that I was an outsider. And if you're the Democratic Party or the media apparatus, you don't necessarily want Andrew Yang coming in because that's too much of a wild card.
The Forward Party, how is it different?
The Forward Party is an inclusive popular movement that is laser focused on opening up the primary system so that anyone can vote for anyone of any party, independent, libertarian, forward, in addition to Democrat and Republican. We can make this happen via ballot initiatives in 24 states around the country. One state already did this last year, Alaska. So the Forward Party is the party to enable more people, more Americans to have a real seat at the table. It's one reason I'm so excited to sit down with you, because I know libertarians have been left out in the cold for far too long and told, well, wait your turn or you're going to mess it up for the Republicans or another candidate.
But third parties just haven't ever really succeeded in America. There aren't enough libertarians to help you out.
Now, not just libertarians or forwardists, but 62% of Americans want to move on from the duopoly. Self-identified independents are now significantly more numerous than Democrats or Republicans.
That is new. Fewer people are Republicans and Democrats.
Gen Z can't stand either of the two parties. So
Good.
You have to look up and say, if you were an entrepreneur and you showed up to a market and there were two providers and 62% of people wanted an alternative, you would say, oh, let me create that. The issue is that the mechanics right now try and push aside anyone who's not a D or an R, or frankly, even if you're a Republican in a place like New York City where we're doing this interview, you're also shut out in the cold. It's not even like like there are these two parties in maybe 90% of the country. It's really a one-party machine.
You were willing to go against the trend. You supported the police when people were screaming about the police, and you got protested and screamed at. We don't want you here. You're not welcome here. Shame on you.
Shame on you, Andrew Yang!
That must have felt pretty awful.
Well, you have to stand up for what you think is right. And most of the New Yorkers I talked to wanted more police in their neighborhoods, not less, because they were seeing a surge in violence and street crime, unfortunately.
Instead of the traditional media, you write in your book that you got your biggest boost from podcasts.
Yes, I did. Again, cable news was not eager to have Andrew Yang on in 2018 or a lot of 2019. And so was podcasts. It was independent voices like yourself. I was the podcast presidential candidate, and we did well as a result, even as the traditional media tried to block us out.
Sam Harris, Joe Rogan, Freakonomics, Ben Shapiro, they're open to other ideas.
Yeah, they're like you. They're just human beings who have their own point of view and their own judgment.
What's with the Fox and CNBC and MSNBC and CNN? They just do not want to hear other ideas.
Yeah, they have a bit of an agenda. I think that there are corporate relationships you could trace. But part of it, too, is that their audiences now expect a certain partisan narrative that if they give it to them, then they get rewarded with ratings, loyalty, ad dollars. And if they were to present something that challenges that narrative, then viewers at this point might not like it and they might go away.
Let me touch on some things in your book which I don't like. You write, more than half the income growth in America accrued to the top 1%. I say, so what if Elon Musk gets filthy rich? He's creating something. Nobody's forced to give him money. If people are free, a few people will get absurdly rich, and we all benefit from that.
I don't have a problem with Elon or anyone else becoming wildly successful. The issue that we have to confront is that, and we talked before about how we both love entrepreneurship. I love entrepreneurship. But Eric Weinstein said that we never knew that capitalism was going to get eaten by its son technology, which unfortunately is happening more and more. You have these trillion-dollar companies that are coming up, and they're sucking up a lot of the economic vitality and the opportunities for entrepreneurship in tons of neighborhoods and communities around the country. If you were to start a business 35 years ago, what might it have been? Hardware store, flower shop, some kind of retail establishment. Now Amazon's this trillion-dollar company that made all of those opportunities disappear while paying next to nothing in taxes.
But they didn't make them disappear. People are still creating things. Sometimes Amazon or Facebook or Google buy them, but then they can start something else.
So I'm for opportunities, I'm for competition, but the thing that I'm going to suggest is that a lot of the traditional rules of competition have applied less and less in an era where you have what Tim O'Reilly calls super money. So if a company reaches like a Netflix type valuation, then they can pay hundreds of millions of dollars for things and not even care about the performance. You can have Amazon spend hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars on companies just to take them out of the picture. So this isn't a truly competitive landscape, but let me say that I have no problem with Americans getting filthy rich, and I applaud people who are starting their own ventures.
Another thing you say, the cost of college has gone up 250% since the 90s. But that's because of politicians subsidizing them.
I agree. I want there to be genuine accountability and competition in education, in healthcare. And right now, those industries are largely protected by government and politicians. It's hurting us, it's hurting people.
So you'd stop government loans for colleges?
I would look at whatever it took so that you could rationalize the cost of education, particularly because right now we are over-resourcing college degrees and under-resourcing entrepreneurship, vocational schools, apprenticeship, and a lot of things that could lead Americans to better, more fulfilling careers. College is not for everyone. We're overemphasizing it in many, many ways.
And that's why tuition goes up faster than inflation, and you got all these kids who go to college who hate it and have big loans. It's caused by government.
Yes, and we should reverse that. It's been a moral failure.
For Forward to become a third party, you want ranked choice voting. You think that'll help?
Ranked choice voting would be great for libertarians, independents, forwardists, because what do you get told every time you're going to go out and vote for a third party candidate? Wasting your vote. You're going to be a spoiler. Ranked choice voting, you can vote for whomever you want, first, second, third.
You can rank them in order of preference. If no candidate gets a majority, the one with the least votes gets eliminated. If you voted for that candidate, your vote goes to your next choice, and you still have a say in who wins.
And then walk out knowing that you didn't waste anything. You got to express your true preference. It's really, really powerful and necessary for us to be able to move on from the duopoly. There's this absurd zero-sum game where it's like, oh, if you vote for this person, it's effectively a vote for the other side, and they'll just try and demonize you for trying to stray from this two-party system. Ranked choice voting gets rid of that objection. I leave the Democratic Party, I say, hey, I'm starting the Forward Party. Everyone starts yelling at me about how I'm going to be a spoiler. And then I turn to them and say, hey, if you're so concerned about it, just switch to ranked choice voting, and then people can vote for the Forward Party candidate, number one, the Democrat two in this case, because it's a lot of Democrats complaining, and then someone else third, and then it's crickets. It's like, if you're concerned about the spoiler effect, let's solve for it. So libertarians, if you want to shut up everyone who says like, oh, you're going to waste your vote, just say, look, let's create a more modern voting system that allows everyone to vote for whomever they want, and anyone else can just shut up about it.
It's not like it's worked really well in Maine or the places where they have it.
Well, I ran in a ranked choice voting election, and I still like it even though I lost that race. but 77% of New Yorkers say they want to keep it. And in New York City, you know this, John, that's essentially unanimous. I saw a survey that said 95% of them found it easy to use. Over 90% ranked more than one candidate, which means they knew how to use it. I mean, it's not that complicated. You just walk in and it's like, rank your candidates. And if you wanted to, you could just rank Andrew Yang number one and walk out, and it would have been no change.
Will people see Andrew Yang on the ballot, Forward Party, or somebody else in 22, 24?
We have to make this move to open nonpartisan primaries and ranked choice voting in states around the country. So the Forward Party is going to be backing ballot initiatives on the city and state level. It will be backing local and congressional candidates, but they'll be running as Republicans, Democrats, independents, because we're practical. And the Forward Party line is not necessarily going to add as much value as getting behind a candidate where they're running because of the dysfunctional duopoly. You have to make all of these choices where people choose a party just because they'll have a better chance of winning. But if you're aligned with this vision, we will get behind you and we can push some of these candidates across the finish line and also these ballot initiatives so that everyone can have a seat at the table.
Forgive me, I just can't imagine you succeeding. The Republicans and Democrats will keep you off the ballot. They control the legislatures, they control the rules. They'll crush you.
Why can't we do what they did in Alaska in some of the other 24 states around the country that allow the exact same ballot initiative? It's enough of us getting together and saying, we're sick of it, enough is enough. So you're right in that you have like an irresistible force in the immovable object. We are betting on the people of this country being so fed up that we can overcome these structural obstacles in states around the country just by getting enough of us to sign on to a ballot initiative and then vote yes for nonpartisan open primaries. Libertarians, you gotta be sick of being like sidelined. You know, it's like we outnumber them. That's really it. That's why I'm here today, is that if enough of us get together and make common cause, we can upend this duopoly. And oh, by the way, we don't have a choice, because we can see if we don't do so, this duopoly is going to destroy us.
Alaska and in Maine too, I assume you'll run. It's easy to run your own candidate.
After we make it so that every American can vote for any candidate regardless of party, then there's going to be a forward party candidate on the line in races around the country. But this is the frustration that so many of us feel, is that we know right now that we're being shut out. We have to change the process itself, and then you will see forward party candidates all over the country.
Another forward party proposal, automatic tax filing. What's that?
I am infuriated that we have to waste so much time figuring out our taxes every year.
Billions of hours.
Billions of hours. Why? Turning us all into like a nation of tax code researchers or experts? It's stupid. Like, we have better things to do.
How does automatic filing fix that?
There is publicly available information based upon what I filed last year and the pay stub my employer sends in, where you can essentially send me my pre-filled out taxes. I can tweak it if you've missed anything. I can sign off on it. This is already the case in other developed countries. You know why it's not the case here in the United States of America? Intuit is making too much money off of TurboTax, so it has lobbied and said, no, can't do it automatically. That's a symptom of what's gone wrong in the US, where we have these hidden taxes on our time, on our wealth in many cases, because DC is so captive and bureaucratic and kludgy, and that's what we need to change.
In a bunch of countries, they have your income information. They just calculate it and say, here's a refund, or you owe this.
They tell you how much you owe or tell you how much you're going to get back. And I'd suggest that the US do that as a starting point. And then if they're right or you don't care, just check, and then you get the check they want to send you. If they miss something, you can make that change. But we should not be spending billions of citizen hours doing something that our government ought to be able to serve to us on a silver platter.
Today, people blame systemic racism, all kinds of things for problems. You had two businesses, your first two, that just failed. You tried again. You think people today will try again?
I certainly hope so. I know so many successful entrepreneurs who flopped their first time out, or second or third. I mean, you can look at anyone from Henry Ford to Steve Jobs, where their first company was a dud. I can speak from my own experience that you learn a ton from failure, and the American system hopefully will enable us to fall down, get up again, because that's what leads to success, and hopefully enterprises that can help move the entire country forward.
Venture for America. Our fellowship program sends graduates from schools to startups in cities with emerging entrepreneurial ecosystems. What? What does that mean?
After my company was sold, I thought our country needed more entrepreneurs. And the way that you develop entrepreneurs, in my view, was send them to work with other more experienced entrepreneurs. So Venture for America is a nonprofit that matched up aspiring college graduates who wanted to learn how to build a business with people who are in that process in Detroit, Baltimore, Cleveland, New Orleans, and other cities around the country. I did that work for 6+ years, met hundreds of dynamic, awesome entrepreneurs, and learned a lot about the country.
And you learned a lot, and you wrote forward. And in the book, you say things that politicians would never say. For example, genetics determines a third to a half of political differences. You're born leading toward one party.
Yeah, this is just research. I'm a facts-based guy, and so the social science research shows that we're born with a genetic predisposition towards one party or another. That genetic predisposition is actually higher than the party of your parents, believe it or not. Though they might match up in some cases, but when they were trying to parse out the variables, if you are born with a penchant towards being either Republican or Democrat, then demonizing someone from the other side makes zero sense, because I'm literally demonizing you for something that is essentially innate.
You write, you basically can't convince people by giving them facts.
Politics right now has become tribal. A lot of folks think that, if I could just deliver this one piece of information to you or this one argument, it would change your mind, and that does not work. It's not actually the way our politics operates today.
I'm wasting my time making these videos.
What you're doing, in my view, is you're creating a platform for people who have a tribe outside of the two major parties, and that's a valuable service, because you can see very clearly that each political entity has its associated media arm, and you are that for the libertarian movement. So I think what you're doing is really important.
But I'm just talking to people who already believe. I can't convince other people.
Though, of course, some people can discover you. They're like kind of new, flexible in their thinking, and then they're like, oh, that's why your subscriber base grows all the time, John.
You write, if you're conscientious, perhaps grew up in a rural environment, you probably became a conservative.
Yeah, there are a number of factors that lead one to be more likely to be conservative or liberal. In my mind, we should be respecting people regardless of their political beliefs, because a lot of it is where they grew up, their type of upbringing, and again, their nature innately.
You say these original things, and yet sometimes you look just like a typical politician. Watching you give a speech at the Democratic National Committee praising Biden and Harris.
I have gotten to know both Joe and Kamala on the trail over the past year. They're real people. They understand the problems we face. They will fight for us and our families every single day.
You're just sucking up.
My goal during the entire 2020 race was to get Trump out of office. I ran for president myself because I thought I'd be a better president. But then when I fell short, I still had the same goal. So I was willing to do or say whatever I thought would help get Trump out.
Because Trump was?
Because Trump was, in my mind, erratic and not leading us in a positive direction.
Your big proposal, universal basic income. Why?
I worked alongside technology entrepreneurs for a better part of a decade, and they know that technology is getting better and better. AI will soon be able to do the work of millions of Americans. And to our earlier conversation, retraining is not a real solution for many, many people.
Well, government retraining isn't, but individual companies know how to retrain workers for what they need.
I would be a fan of trying to put resources into workers' hands and then let private employers retrain people for jobs that currently exist, as opposed to a government program that tries to imagine that the job's going to be there for people in many cases. But if you are undergoing the greatest technological transformation in the history of the country, which we are right now, you're going to see millions of Americans get shoved to the side. So I championed universal basic income because I thought it would ease that transition for tens of millions of families.
You say it would make our families stronger and healthier, save money on incarceration, homelessness, emergency room health care.
There are a lot of costs right now that are being borne by our society. One example that's on that list is if someone gets really sick and they're indigent, they don't just lie on the street. Where do they wind up? The emergency room, which, by the way, is super costly. And the taxpayer ends up footing that bill. If you invest in people, you're going to end up getting that value back in entrepreneurship and local.
But just giving them $1,000 a month is investing?
Very often. And one of the things that I talk about in my last book was that there were some natural experiments where in an Indian tribe, some families got money right alongside families that didn't get money. And you saw outcomes that were dramatically better for the families that did get money in terms of conscientiousness, a belief that if you do the right thing, like you'll actually get something positive in return. and the outcomes for those kids and those families were vastly superior.
Please send us those studies, because logically to me, the opposite would happen. You give people $1,000 a month, 12 thou a year. That's more than I made when I started out, though inflation has happened. I wouldn't have pushed through my fears, overcome my stuttering, worked as hard as I did if I had free money. It was not having it that drove me.
Again, I'm a data guy, and so you see consistently that having a certain level of income is better for someone's ability to learn, conscientiousness.
Income implies you're working and you earned it.
Oh, well, even if the money, as in that case in the North Carolina Indian tribe, that the money was coming in their case, it was from a casino. But one of the things I'm going to suggest, John, is that I grew up child of immigrants, but my parents worked very hard. And there was always a sense that, at least like if my brother and I were to become total disasters, like they probably wouldn't, well, maybe they would have, who knows. But I was going to say that a lot of families have this tacit fallback. And that if you have that fallback, it makes you more likely to take a risk, maybe to start a business. If you're in a position where you know if you fail, you die, then you're not as likely to take a swing at something that might lead to not just creating a job for yourself, but for other people.
For more of my content, go to johnstossel.com. I post a new short video every Tuesday. That's at johnstossel.com. We've kind of done some of this during COVID. The government gave, on average, $2,000 to adults. What's the result? Inflation. A lot of people don't want to work.
The problem right now is that billions of dollars that are going into the hands of Americans are actually tied to not working. If you have enhanced unemployment benefits and then you just turn up at a job the next day, your benefits disappear. That is not the right approach.
That's why you just want to give them no conditions.
Yeah, you want to never tie negative incentives to the money that's going out to Americans. And I talk to thousands of Americans around the country who won't get a part-time job because they're afraid of losing their benefits, their disability status, like you name it. I talk to Americans, and that's wrong. Like, look, if we're going to give you this economic lift, it should be empowering, not disempowering, which right now it is for far too many.
The COVID payments have increased inflation because they just gave it to everybody. But that's what you would do with your $1,000 checks.
If you look at the sources of inflation in American life, they tend to be focused in these truly dysfunctional markets: healthcare, housing, education. That's what we should be trying to address, which the government has been failing on for years. But if you look at consumer goods before this time period, food, clothes, entertainment, media, most of those prices have remained steady, or quality's gone up, because those markets are truly competitive. We have to introduce competition into the non-competitive markets.
Before this time period, but in this time period, they're printing all this money, and doesn't that have to cause inflation? Suddenly there are all these dollars out there and supplies can't keep up.
Right now we do have a lag between supply and demand, and I'd be doing everything I could to try and get inflation down, including, again, attacking the markets where there isn't real competition.
And how do we pay for it? I mean, you want to give out much more than Biden's given out. He gave out $2,000 per person. You're talking $12,000 per year. That's $3 trillion.
Well, the CARES Act was passed by Congress a number of months ago. It was $2.2 trillion, which by the numbers is enough to give every man, woman, and child in the country $1,000 a month for 6-7 months. So we already passed that bill. Where did the money go? It did not go to you or me or families. It went into the pipes. It went into the institutions, the banks, the airlines, to shore up balance sheets. I'm going to suggest that we're already putting this money out. It's just not going to us. If you were to ask people watching this right now, hey, government's going to spend $2.2 trillion. Would you rather it just goes to everyone in the country or to the pipes? I think most people watching this would choose the people. And that's what I was suggesting.
Millions of people would be happy to sit and watch TV and play on their phones. They would never even look for a job.
Most Americans want to be valued, want connections to the community. We have to reverse this decline in the labor force participation rate in the U.S. And I think that
what gets people to participate is needing money. It's what got me to participate.
There are different ways to connect people to the labor market. I think we should be doing anything in our power to get that labor force rate up. But I'm going to suggest that there are a number of reasons that are going into the decline. It's not just a one-factor picture.
Some of the people who get $1,000 a month would snort it up or just hurt themselves. And then they'd be in the street and people would say, well, we have to spend more on welfare or give them more money to get them on their feet. It's endless.
There are a number of interrelated problems in American life. We're not doing enough to help rebuild the fabric of these communities, to have touch points so that people have employment that they're excited about. I agree with all of that. If you look at the drug addiction problem in America, how did that happen? It's because there was a company, Purdue Pharma, that decided it could profit to the tune of billions of dollars by getting millions of Americans addicted. I talked to a friend.
No, they had a painkiller that was effective. They ignored the addiction maybe, but that wasn't their goal.
Well, their goal was to make as much money as possible. But I'm going to suggest to
As
the people.
businesses
But I'm
want
going to
to do.
suggest that people watching this right now, if you had a choice between legalizing marijuana for management of pain or dispensing Oxy and knowing it's going to kill 100,000 Americans, I think most people would choose pot, which is where I am too. We should legalize pot, make it so that, hey, if you have a painful condition, feel free to partake. But the reason we didn't wind up there was because the drug company made tens of billions of dollars, and that was a more lucrative way to go. I mean, I don't think that was the right choice.
He would legalize weed. What about cocaine, heroin, other drugs?
I would legalize mushrooms, magic mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms. The data I've seen suggests they can alleviate depression and PTSD in military veterans, whom I met on the trail too. I talked to a veteran and took me aside and put his arm around me and said, I tried everything, and the only thing that helped my PTSD was psilocybin mushrooms. And you hear that from a military veteran, you think, okay, you know, that's very, very compelling. So there are a number of substances that I am for legalizing or decriminalizing.
Don't we own our own bodies once we're an adult? Why does it have to have some medicinal purpose? Why can't I poison myself if I want?
Well, there are certain substances, in my view, that if you were to legalize, and I'd put cocaine on this list, is that the negatives outweigh the positives. If you have something like marijuana or psilocybin, then I'm like, okay, the positives seem to outweigh the negatives. Again, I'm just a data guy.
I want individuals to decide these things. You want government to decide.
I want individuals to decide just about everything under the sun. But if there's something that government can do that will improve our way of life, I do think that there's a place there, there's a role there.
Government is now 40% of the economy. How big should it be?
Well, this is one of the magic elements of universal basic income, is that it shrinks government a lot. Imagine if our government, instead of creating a new bureaucracy and a new army of administrators, it just gave the money to us. And you look at that, and that shrinks government and grows private industry, grows entrepreneurship, grows small businesses. That, to me, is where our government should be focusing on. There is a friend of mine, Andy Stern, who's no libertarian, but he said to me that our government is bad at a lot of things. Most people probably agree. But one of the things it's good at is sending large numbers of checks to people. So our government should be leaning into one of its core competencies, and that actually shrinks government. It doesn't grow it. It grows our...
It would shrink government if you would abolish the welfare system or Medicaid, but you're keeping all those.
Well, if you were to have a universal basic income, then a lot of these government programs that currently exist would shrink over time, and that should be the goal.
Forward party principles focus on increasing life expectancy, childhood success. I would think giving people money, $1,000 a month, would promote the opposite.
If you look at kids' educational outcomes, and this is one of the frustrations I think a lot of Americans feel, and I think a lot of your audience will appreciate this, we spend a lot of money on schools right now. Two pretty poor results. And so we're jumping up and down being like, why won't this work? And the reason it won't work is it turns out that 2/3 of that child's educational outcome is determined outside of the school. That's home life, levels of stress in the household, type of neighborhood. So if you had a choice between funneling more money into a dysfunctional system that controls 1/3 of our kids' educational outcome, or putting the money into the home environment where maybe they'd have a better shot at the 65%, I think we should be investing in the 65%.
Those are our choices?
That's a real choice because we're spending, here in New York, we're spending Gosh, I think it's in excess of $30,000 per child per year on the school.
And wasting it, but I don't see you proposing cutting that back.
Well, I'm for investing in the 65%. I did end up giving a headbutting match with the teachers' unions about some of the things that were going on in the schools.
Let's go to some things where we agree. You oppose censuring people for what they say.
Yeah, I do. Last I checked, we're all human, and people can say things I disagree with, and I should regard that as pretty normal.
A comedian called you a Jew chink, and you said,
well, I said he shouldn't lose his job over that. He was fired by SNL.
The Saturday Night Live comic is out just 4 days after he was introduced as a new cast member.
Not for that comment specifically, but maybe some others too. But he slurred me by name, and I said, look, I don't think he should lose his job. And of course, he did lose his job. That's just a sign of the times we're in. I didn't think that was right, though.
because?
Well, one, he's a comedian, and it's kind of his job to push boundaries and transgress. But two, for the people that are all angry about it, they'll forget about it a week or two later, but the guy still won't have his job. You know what I mean? Like we should not be a society that is that punitive for someone who, in that case, is an artist.
Comedians shock people. That's part of what makes it funny.
Yeah, and I said on Bill Maher a couple weeks ago, a comedian's job is to entertain. No one thinks it's a comedian's job to tell us how to think or what to think. And so if they say something objectionable, you can say, hey, that wasn't funny because your job is to entertain me. and that's a market decision. You know, if a comedian consistently doesn't entertain people, then they will probably lose their job at some point.
Your 2020 platform, climate change is an existential threat. Existential?
It's going to mean the erosion of many coastline communities. Here in New York, you're going to see flooded subway stations. It is going to be a grave, grave threat to a significant number of Americans, not just on the coasts, but in certain other parts of the Southwest where you're going to see droughts, hurricanes, and the like.
Existential? We can't adjust to it like Holland did years ago?
Well, we're going to do our best to adjust to it, but we can all see, again, to some of our earlier points, is our government up to that challenge? When I was on the debate stage, I said we should start moving people to higher ground. I mean, that's the kind of thing that, in my mind, we could do if we tried to get ahead of this curve.
Forcibly tell people living on coasts, move?
I would induce them. I would say, hey, guess what? Good news. We're going to give you a relocation package.
So spending more in addition to the basic income. How do we pay for all this?
The way we pay for this is we start trying to capture the gains of AI and other technologies that are going to end up taking a lot of jobs, producing a lot of value. One of the examples,
artificial intelligence.
Yes, one of the examples I use is that 2 million Americans work in call centers right now, and Google's AI can do that job probably today or yesterday. You have to examine how much will Google pay in taxes, and the answer is just about nothing. They'll move it through Ireland or the Cayman Islands. So you have to try to evolve to make sure that that gain actually ends up showing up on the books in a way that we can benefit from, as opposed to saying, well, like I guess Google's AI just beat out those 2 million people.
I'm not getting it. You're spending trillions more, and how do we pay for it?
We make sure that Google's AI pays taxes because they're going to be eliminating the jobs of people that used to pay taxes.
You say the increase in natural disasters is costing us hundreds of billions of dollars. But what increase? Here's a graph of hurricanes over the years. Disasters have not increased.
I was in the Midwest when they had flooding that was highly, highly unusual for them. It ended up causing tens of millions of dollars worth of damage.
We've always had floods and droughts. It's not new.
These were parts of the country that the floods were highly, highly unusual. When I was in California, they had fires at a level that they hadn't experienced heretofore.
But that's because they didn't pick up the debris on the forest floors. These were government-caused fires.
The government should have done a better job clearing that brush, but the forests have become increasingly dry and flammable because of climate change.
Climate change has made a difference. But that big a difference?
My government plan was to try and ramp up the level of resources to clean up the brush because I agree with you, we should be doing a better job. As usual, we haven't adjusted.
So that's spending more still.
Well, there are certain things I think we should spend more on and certain things I think we should spend less on.
What should we spend less on?
I think that there are a lot of extraneous workers in government that if you dug in, you'd say, look, turns out we can do this job more efficiently with technology and in some and in other ways. Like, we should take government efficiency more seriously.
Fire millions of government workers?
Well, hey, in a world where there was universal basic income, maybe they'd have a place to go.
You want government-funded journalism.
I am a huge fan of local journalism. I think it's depolarizing. It tends to be more objective. It actually tells you what's going on in your community. So if there's a way that we can make it so that local publications can survive, the way that town libraries survive. It's like town libraries, you don't expect it to make a lot of money, but you're glad it's there. Particularly if you're a parent like I am, you love the town library. I think that the town library should have a town bulletin board that ends up functioning as a publication. And I do think that's worthwhile to try and keep us from becoming this polarized nation that will lead us to conflict over time.
But the town library would never criticize the people who fund it. If government's paying your check, how are you going to be an objective reporter?
Well, I think the funding mechanism can be very much independent of any editorial decision, and you can see that a little bit with PBS, NPR, and some of these other organs that
They all
get
suck
checks.
up to government and say how government solutions are great. PBS's listeners are 3-to-1 Democrat.
The numbers I saw said that people regard NPR and PBS as actually more nonpartisan and trustworthy than the majority of other media outlets out there.
Well, that's damned with faint praise.
I don't disagree with you there. But if you can imagine a world of tax rebates for local publications, I don't think that would prevent that local paper from criticizing the mayor or the city council.
If you don't get universal basic income, you said you'd be happy with raising the minimum wage.
I'd be happy with a negative income tax, which was Milton Friedman's idea. In the absence of that, I do think that getting some more money into people's hands is a positive, and it would end up rewarding folks showing up to work in some businesses that right now have a hard time finding them.
Raise it to what?
Depends upon the market and the region.
How would that work?
I think if you had a national minimum wage, I think it should be in the double digits, because no one should be working and be poor, like below the poverty line.
15 is popular today.
The numbers I've said, 15 is appropriate in a lot of the country.
Why not 50?
Well, at some point, then you wind up making that labor and that business impractical.
Because
Because a lot of small private companies have very thin margins. And so if you said, hey, pay someone $50, then all of a sudden it doesn't make sense to have that worker.
So 50 is too much. How do we know 15 is right? I mean, every business is different.
Well, it's true, but I worked a minimum wage job in my teens. I was making, I think, like $6.20 an hour or something along those lines.
So you wouldn't have gotten that first job today.
But it turns out that if you look at that $6.20 an hour I was making in the 80s, and you adjusted for inflation, it winds up around $15 today.
But you acknowledge some people wouldn't be hired. The kid who's never worked before might not be worth 15 to a business. And more kids, more uneducated people will not be able to find jobs, first jobs.
It's also true what you said earlier, which is in a world of universal basic income, I was open to not having a minimum wage, because then people would have enough to get by. And then if you had a certain type of opportunity, you could get someone in for whatever the heck they would take.
Gun control. You'd like a stringent licensing system with 5-year renewal requirements.
I liken firearms to motor vehicles, where if you have a licensing system, I think that's appropriate.
So the millions of gun owners every 5 years will have to reapply, re-get licensed.
Well, it's just to make sure that, you can still shoot. I mean, it's not going to be very hard.
People have time to do this and the money every 5 years?
I mean, heck, I renew my driver's license every 5 years. It's pretty quick.
In states that licensed concealed carry, crime dropped. The bad guys were suddenly a little more afraid that the person they might rob might be packing. Why is gun ownership so bad?
I don't think that gun ownership is bad. I'm all for Second Amendment rights. I just think that there's a certain level of responsibility that you should have, because it's like a life or death instrument.
You want a clear definition of assault weapon and prevent their manufacture. So it's true, there's no clear definition now. People just say, get rid of assault weapons, but people don't know what it is. What is it?
You know, I would talk to military experts about what constitutes an assault weapon instead of the kind of lazy journalism we see out there. We can agree or disagree on a lot of social issues. I'm going to suggest that a lot of Americans who agree that we need to move on from the duopoly can make common cause around that and then sort out our other differences later. So that is the mission of the Forward Party. They're going to be forward independents, libertarians, forward Democrats, forward Republicans, who just want to move on from the duopoly. That has to be the unifying.
The Forward Party is not the platform you had as a Democrat in 2020.
That's correct.
Well, I want to compliment you in that, unlike so many politicians these days, you're willing to talk to everybody, left, right, to me. And that's unusual and kind of sad. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you. I love talking to folks like you because we do need an alternative from the duopoly in the worst way. We need an alternative from the corporate media in the worst way. You provide that alternative. I want to provide that home for people that know that the current two-party system is not working and that we can change it. We should be fed up. We should be angry. We can see very clearly the way our country is going, and we deserve better than this.
Thanks for listening. New episodes drop the first Monday of every month. You can subscribe wherever you get podcasts.